everyone. Thank you for joining another episode of the PN Learning Series. My name is Shavi. I am a product manager at LinkedIn, and I'm the host of the show today. Please drop in the chat where you are joining us from. I already see a lot of excitement from a lot of you. Nicola from Italy, Nishan from India. So please say hello. Drop in the chat where you're joining us from. So a couple housekeeping before we introduce our formal guest, Teresa. This PM Learning Series is part of LinkedIn Learning's role-based learning series, live streaming events where industry thought leaders and product practitioners share their career journey and lessons learned along the way to inspire current and aspiring product builders like you to level up your product career. So make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, which has the link in the event description. To receive a recap of this event as well as future events. Today with me, I'd like to bring up Teresa. Hi, Teresa. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think you have so many fans. Oh my gosh, the chat has really exploded. But before we get into that, I just want to do a brief intro of you, and we'll hear a lot more about your experience. You are an internationally acclaimed author, speaker, and coach. You're the author of the book Continuous Discovery Habits, which I very much enjoy reading, and we'll get into some of that today. You teach us, hundreds of companies from big and small, over how to have a structure and sustainable approach to continuously discover, insights from our customer to inform our product decisions. So can't wait to learn more from you. And I think in your bio, we said that you have taught and influenced over 8,500 product people, probably more because we have 3,700 people RSVP for this event. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here. It's fun to see all the different locations in the comments.
Yeah, this is crazy. A lot of people joining from Brazil, Chicago. We have folks from Sao Paulo. Wow, a lot of Brazilian representation from Prague, Canada, Spain. Okay, Switzerland. Thank you so much. Knowing this is Friday, so assuming this is probably Friday night for many of you, taking some time before you have your dinner to join us and learn from Teresa today. So thank you very much for this global community of product builders and product lovers. So let's get started, Teresa. Tell us a little bit about your career journey. How did you get into the world of product, and what led you to writing the book, Continuous Discovery Habits?
Yeah, so I started my career as an interaction designer back in the 90s. But I was always on the sort of functional design side of design and not the visual side of design. And very quickly in my career, my first several jobs was at very early stage startups where you tend to wear a lot of hats. The first two companies I worked at didn't really have product managers, so I didn't know that was a role or a thing. But I was trained in human-centered design and ended up doing a lot of product work. And then it was in my third role that I had a head of product come to me and say, you're really a product manager. And so I kind of grew into that role. And then again, at early stage startups, moved into management roles, managed product and design teams. Ran an early stage startup for a few years as a CEO. And then really just saw the same challenges everywhere. Saw that no matter where I worked, most product people, most designers, most software engineers were just not spending very much time with customers. There was a lot of making decisions about what to build in isolation. And that sort of ran counter to what intuitively made sense to me and what I had learned in a sort of human-centered design program. And so at some point, I think everybody that's sort of steeped in the startup world, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, gets tired. And that's really what happened, is I just wanted to step away from the fast-paced startup world. And I started to look at where could I have an impact? What were the things that I was most excited about? And what I loved most was really developing teams and working with product people and helping them really make better decisions about what to build. And so about 10 years ago, I started working as a discovery coach. And the book, Continuous Discovery Habits, is really a culmination of a lot of that coaching work, is really just looking at, I think of continuous discovery as my product. And as I work with teams, I'm always looking at how do I make it easier to adopt? How do I make it more sustainable? How do I make it more applicable in a lot of different contexts? And so the book really came out of that work and just realizing that a lot of the frameworks and tools that I was helping teams adopt were having a big impact, and I wanted to get it in more hands.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that background story. And I think, Teresa, you just get so much love from Brazil. So I just want to do a quick shout out to all the Brazilians joining us today.
There's a
And thank you
lot
so
of
much,
passion
Bianca.
for discovery in Brazil right now. We have a ton of students coming from Brazil.
That's awesome. So you mentioned about how you've been working, with a different size of teams, and over the past 10 years, reframe this framework around continuous customer discovery. So just to level set for audience joining who might be new to this theory, can you walk us through what you found to be most effective and efficient when it comes to doing customer discovery, and how did you come to that realization?
Yeah, so it's really easy to overcomplicate things. So I like to keep things as simple as possible, right? So when we're talking about discovery, it's really as simple as how do we make good decisions about what to build? And I think as an industry, we're finally starting to recognize that if we want to make good decisions about what to build, we have to include the customer in the process. And I like to think about that as how do we build in fast feedback loops? So as we're deciding things, how do we get feedback quickly that we made a good decision? And from a discovery standpoint, I like to break it down into two really simple activities. One is on the generative side, as we go, how do we learn about our customers' lives? How do we learn where they have unmet needs, pain points, and desires? I really like interviewing for that because it's very sustainable. It's something we can do week over week. Observations are also great if you're in an industry where you have access to customers and you can go observe them in their environment. That's even better. For most teams, that's not sustainable week over week. And then the other side of that coin is the evaluative piece. So how do we evaluate decisions after we make them? And that second activity I really frame as assumption testing. So how do we quickly get feedback on the things that we believe to be true? And so I would say the heart of discovery is composed of both of those things. We're using interviewing to discover unmet needs, pain points, and desires, which I collectively call opportunities. And we're using assumption testing to evaluate our potential solutions.
I love that. And the good news is that in today's talk, we'll touch upon a little bit of both aspect. And for folks who are joining today, please, if you have any question throughout this talk, around customer discovery or to Teresa's, any case studies that she worked in, please drop your question in the chat and we'll pick them out from time to time as we see fit. So don't be shy. Shower us with questions. Challenge on me to pick out the best ones. Okay, so Teresa, you mentioned about two aspects. One is how do we learn about customers' needs and what they want through interview. Can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the best practices for interviewing customer? Because sometimes the way how we frame interview question can be misleading or can be sparking sort of an idealistic version of what customer think that they should say or should do, but it's not very far away from the reality. So what are some of the best practice that you have for, trying to get the most out of a customer interview and uncover those, I guess, undeserved needs and, underlying needs that were not obvious?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is if anybody listening has never talked to a customer, I don't want you to overthink this. Exposure and access to any customer is better than none. But if you are already engaging with your customers, there's a little bit you can do to improve the reliability of the feedback that you get. So our intuition is just to ask our customer direct questions. Like if I work at Netflix, I might want to ask my customers things like, what do you like to watch? How do you decide what to watch? Who do you watch with? What device do you watch on? The problem with these questions is that they're going to lead to unreliable answers. And what I mean by that is that the participant's answer isn't necessarily going to reflect their behavior in reality. And it's not because they're being duplicitous or they're trying to be misleading. It's just because of the way our brains are wired. So we often fall prey to a number of cognitive biases. This is because our brains are wired to be energy efficient. We're not really reflecting on our past behavior. So one of the things that I teach is to avoid those direct questions that are out of context and instead focus on collecting specific stories about past behavior. So instead of asking you, what do you like to watch? Who do you watch with? Things like that. I'm just going to ask you, tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. And I'm going to very diligently work to help you tell me that story. So you might by default just say, oh, well, it was last night after dinner. That's not a very good story, but as the interviewer, I can prompt you, okay, well, set the scene. Where were you? What were you doing? What happened first? What'd you do next? And I can kind of collect that whole narrative and listen for where were you? Who were you with? How did you decide what to watch? How much did you watch? Did you run into any problems? And by walking through a specific instance, I get a much clearer picture of your actual behavior. I also get context and nuance because I'm getting the full story. And we start to see unmet needs, pain points, and desires emerge from actual stories. So it's just a little change you can make in your interviewing process to have the reliability of that feedback go way up.
That's awesome. I love the story aspect of bringing out context to understand how were decisions made, how did customer behave in a certain way. We have one member, Matthew, asking sort of a related question about, when would you use interviews to dig out the stories, the nuance, the context? And then when would you say in the customer discovery phase that you would opt in maybe to do a survey that's less of a giving you that contextual richness? So how would you choose between the two methods? I think maybe.
Oh, go ahead.
Tangential to that, we also have another member, Jasmine, asking, what's the best practice for remote work environment? Like, is there anything different than what you would do in in a physical environment? Any consideration alluding to that?
Yeah, so let's talk about interviewing versus surveys. So the first, I started with talking about there's sort of two fundamental activities we do in discovery. One is we're interviewing to discover unmet needs, pain points, and desires, and the other is we're assumption testing to evaluate our decisions. I think for that first piece, where we're really trying to understand our customers' context and their needs, interviewing is far superior than surveys. It's really hard on a survey to get the big context. Even on surveys, when we ask open-ended questions, like tell me about your experience on Netflix, most people are not very good at staying grounded in a specific story without the interviewer helping them. So it's really hard to get that really rich context in a survey. Now, surveys can be really valuable. I really like to use surveys when running assumption tests. So for example, one of the examples I use in my book is, let's say a streaming service like Netflix wanted to offer live sports. And one of the things they wanted to test is, are our subscribers sports fans? They could easily launch a one-question survey within their product and just ask a really simple question. Did you watch a sporting event last week? So again, we're still going to ask about specific recent behavior. So we're not going to ask in general, do you watch sports? If we ask about recent past behavior, it's more reliable. But that's a great way to get fast feedback on actual customer behavior. But what you lose is a lot of that context and nuance. So it's not a great way to discover opportunities. And then this question about remote environments, we're actually living in a time period where we have really great collaborative tools. We can interview over video calls. We have really high, thanks to Zoom, we have really high quality video, right? We can do an interview over video and it's not that different from what's in person. So I don't think that we're limited anymore by being remote. I would say the biggest thing with remote is really how much you're able to collaborate with your team. So I think when it comes to not being co-located, the more important thing is, do you have overlap in your working hours? And I think as long as you do, we have the collaborative tools to make it really effective. So I don't see remote as a factor anymore.
I think remote actually enable you to reach out to more customer and get their facial expression. Maybe they can demo and walk you through how to use the product, giving you more context that way.
There are advantages to remote. That's a really great point. Like if we look at just this session right now, we have people joining all over the world. If you're only doing your interviewing and your testing in person, you're limited to your geographic region. So yeah, that's a major advantage of being remote.
Yep. I think, Teresa, there's a lot of interest around how to actually operationalize this approach now that we know how powerful it is to ask for the story, getting the nuance and the context. I think one question from Dean is that in a B2B environment, sometimes people might or might not want to talk to you. Like, how do you recruit them? How do you operationalize that? And then in larger organization, but with smaller user base, maybe are you contacting them too frequently or repeatedly, or how do you think about continuous discovery without overwhelming to the customer, and still like how do you operationalize that? How do you schedule, recruit participants, feeling like you're getting the new insight? How do you get the team also involved in that as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects to this. So first of all, think about it from your customer's point of view. I get emails all the time from products and services that I use where they say, hey, we'd love your feedback. We want to talk to you about your experience on your product. Guess what? I never respond to any of those questions. They're asking me a favor, right? They're basically saying, can we have some of your time so that you can help us? That is not the right way to frame discovery research. You want to help your customer. So the first thing is when you're asking, don't frame it as, hey, do us a favor, will you help us out? Frame it as, we want to help you. We want to make the product better for you. If one, for example, my course platform is a software product that I have a number of pain points with. And if they emailed me and specifically highlighted one of those pain points and said, hey, we're looking to solve this need, will you talk to us about your needs around that? And I had that need, I'm going to say yes to that every single time because I benefit from that conversation. So that's the first thing, is you really need to frame your ask from your customer's point of view and frame it as a benefit to them. I see all the time, like in Slack communities and emails and on websites, people are just saying, hey, we're doing research, will you talk to us? I don't think that's ever going to be effective, or it's rarely going to be effective. The second thing is, in the book, I talk about automating your recruiting process, creating moments where your customer can opt in. This makes it so that you're not constantly emailing them, right? You can recruit them from within your product or service where they're opting in. That helps a little bit with this burnout concept. The third thing is, the reason why we burn out our customers when we're talking about interviews is because we go to our customers and say, hey, isn't my idea great? What do you think of this solution? Well, how about this solution? That's exhausting. And they know they're probably never going to see any of those solutions. And it feels like a waste of time. Whereas if instead you're asking your customer to tell you their personal stories, it's actually a really enjoyable experience. And what I'll tell you, a really good sign that you conducted an effective interview is when at the end, the customer says, wow, that was great. When can we do it again? And if you make the interview all about their customer and all about collecting their story, you are going to start hearing that. And this idea of customer burnout is going to completely go away.
That's awesome. I like the best takeaway for me is framing your interview, not just like, hey, I'm doing a user research. Can you help me? But more like in the benefit of the customer. Like, hey, I'm trying to understand so that we can better serve you. Teresa, there are a couple of questions from the chat around people who are either working on internal product or product they're facing internal stakeholders who usually come in, with like a preempt notion of what they want or what they want to build. And then it's slightly different from an external customer. Do you have any sort of best practice around how to navigate that, how to work with, either internal stakeholders who have a strong opinion or B2B product that's a little under the surface, not like a rich user interaction type of product?
Yeah, so I think there's two different things going on here. So first of all, when we have an internal stakeholder that's really opinionated about what you should build, there's two different situations. Are they your end user, like you're building software for that internal stakeholder, or are they just being their own advocate for the end user? So in that second case, if they're not the end user, what I would recommend that you do is that in the book, I talk about one of the stepping stones to good assumption testing is to take the idea, story map it. So map out what the customer has to do to get value from it. Use that story map to generate assumptions. So this is a really effective activity to do with stakeholders that are really solution focused because it exposes gaps in the solution. It helps them see where the solution might have problems. So what a lot of product teams do is a stakeholder comes to them with an idea and we push back. We go, that idea will never work. We're giving them our conclusion. Whereas if instead we story map with them and we help them generate assumptions, we let them come to their own conclusion that their idea actually has some problems. So it's a really effective tool in your toolkit for managing stakeholders. If it's the other situation where that stakeholder is actually your end user, what's great about that is now you have a ton of access. So if you're working like on a platform team and you're building APIs for your other product teams, or you're working on call center software for the call center agents that work for your company, you have a ton of access to those people. And so I actually don't recommend interviewing every week. I recommend observing them working every week. So that means if you're building call center software, go sit with them for an hour or two every single week and watch them use your software. If you're building APIs that are used by your internal teams, go pair program with them every single week while they're implementing your tools. You will learn so much. So that you have a major advantage of having your customers internal because you have a lot of access to them.
That's awesome. I love the observing versus interviewing, depending on the product that you build, right? Specific, unique to the context. And sometimes it's better to observe in the context of the product, its work, or how work gets done. Or sometimes it's better to interview and ask for that nuance in the story if you don't have access to the customer or the end user. We have a couple of questions. I think let's transition to the second part. We talk about learning about customer needs through interviewing. You mentioned a few times already how to evaluate, different opportunities and like the assumptions that we made. Maybe let's start it with like, let's say you interview a customer and you discover different type of opportunities that we can potentially pursue. I guess the question is like, first, how do you structure your opportunity? And then second, given the limited resource, I think every company, even for large enterprise, and design product resources are always constrained. How do you prioritize the most important opportunities that you found during the interviews? And then we can talk about assumption testing later as a follow-up question. But yeah, prioritizing opportunities to pursue.
Yeah, so the first thing, this whole process starts with getting clear around what kind of outcome are we trying to drive. So what is the most important business metric for our team to be focused on at any given moment in time? That outcome sets the scope for our discovery. So that's going to set the scope of what we're learning about in our interviews. And so as we interview week over week, we're going to be collecting a set of needs, pain points, and desires related to that outcome. What a lot of teams do is they get stuck in this trap where they're always reacting to the last customer conversation they had. And so to sort of break that cycle, what I want to see teams is to collect all the opportunities that they're hearing across their interviews and to map them out on a visual that I call an opportunity solution tree. It's a really simple tree structure that helps you start with an outcome, map visually all the opportunities that you're hearing from your interviews. And then what that does is it allows you to make a more strategic decision about where do we want to play. So what are the things that influence that decision? We're looking for what's going to have the most impact on our outcome in the near term. So there's a lot of elements to that. Our position in the market will affect that. Our current company strategic initiatives are going to affect that. The most salient customer needs are going to affect that. So there's a lot of different factors to look at when prioritizing opportunities, but effectively what we're trying to decide is not what should we do or not do, because we want to assume eventually with time we want to address all of these opportunities, but the better framing is what are we going to do next? So where can we have the most impact tomorrow? That's really the more important prioritization question. And I think mapping those out visually really helps us kind of compare and contrast. What if we were to do this versus this? And I see that missing on a lot of teams. A lot of teams were just stuck reacting to the most recent conversation because everything feels like an emergency. Whereas I think slowing down a little bit, taking that inventory, getting the big picture can really help you be more effective.
Yeah, I love that. What's the fastest path to maximize ROI? Like, why now? I think it's the essential question to say why we're pursuing a particular opportunity and mapping that to the AM outcome. There were a couple questions throughout the chat that were asking, sort of alluding to this notion of like, how do you increase your conviction that we're pursuing the right, priority? How do you validate, this is the right opportunity to pursue? I think part of it is around your mention about assumptions that we made around certain, solutions that we want to pursue and certain opportunities. I guess the simple question is, how do you increase confidence that this is the right thing that we're going to go down this path and explore?
Yeah, I'm going to argue I don't want you to increase your conviction. I don't want you to think this is the right answer. There are no right answers, right? We want to believe that if we do really good discovery work, we're going to find the best opportunity and the best solution That's really faulty thinking. There is no best opportunity and no best solution. There are a million opportunities we could address and create value. There are a million solutions we could build and create value. Think about it more as this relative optimization problem. How do we find a better solution? How do we find a better opportunity for this moment in time? And that sounds like a really subtle reframing, but I think it's critically important. There's a guy, Carl Wick. He's a educational philosopher at the University of Michigan. I think he's still there. And he defines wisdom as balancing having confidence in your ability to act while also doubting what you know. And I love that definition because I think for product people, that's a really important balance to keep in mind. We do have to build enough confidence that we're willing to move forward, but we want to leave enough room for doubt that in our next interview, if we hear a more important opportunity, that we want to be open to that. If tomorrow someone walks in with a better solution idea, we want to be open to that. And even when we're building something, we want to stay open to it may not be the best thing for us to be building, because that's what motivates us to instrument it and to measure it and to follow up on it and to iterate on it, right? In the product world, it's so easy to fall in love with our ideas and be like, this is the best thing ever. And all that does is we fall prey to confirmation bias. We start to miss completely the negative feedback. We start to ignore all the metrics that are telling us we might have a problem. So I actually think it's really important that we cultivate doubt. Now we do have to move forward, right? We do have to have enough confidence to move forward. And I think the way that we do that is that we run a good discovery process. We combine interviewing and assumption testing, and we remember everything is a bet. And we want to be constantly measuring how is that bet performing and constantly adapting and adjusting.
Wow, that's so powerful. Giving it enough room for, cultivating doubts and use that in a very productive and healthy way. I think that's something that people are afraid, but it's so fundamental. I think that's actually the essence of continuous discovery, because then you continue to learn, you keep that open mind, right? Like to learn new opportunity. Maybe there's a better way of solving problems. So I absolutely love that. Well, also coming up at time, I'd like to ask maybe one more question to follow up on this. So Teresa, you mentioned a few times about the importance of testing assumptions and how easy that we can fall into loving our idea, right? Because we're human being. We love coming up with stuff, and that's our baby. We love the idea. Can you give us some examples? What are hypothesis versus idea, and how best to test them to help us quickly learn and adapt and create that doubts or validate the doubts?
Yeah, I moved away from the hypothesis language because I think it scares people, right? Like I don't really love the experiment and hypothesis language anymore because we're not really scientists. So I've moved more to talking about assumption testing. And I think we all can get clarity on what an assumption is. So first of all, let's talk about how most people test ideas. Most people, when they're testing the design, they prototype the entire idea. That means we're doing all of the design work up front before we're getting any feedback on is this even the right solution. When we're testing, one of the most common ways that we're testing ideas is with A/B testing. That means we're doing all of the delivery work before we get any feedback that we built the right thing. The key with assumption testing is we're taking our solutions, we're breaking them down into their underlying assumptions. So what are the things that need to be true in order for this solution to work? And then we're rapidly testing those assumptions. The key difference here, A/B testing takes weeks or months. Prototyping an entire solution takes days to weeks. Most assumption tests can be run in a day or two. But what makes this hard is it's hard to see our own assumptions. We make assumptions in a wide variety of categories. Why do we think our customer wants this? Why do we think they'll be able to understand it? Why do we think they'll be able to find it? Why do we think it'll be good for our business? Why do we think we can build it? Like there's a whole set of assumptions there. So the first piece is to do the work to see your assumptions. And I include strategies in the book for how to do that if you want to learn more. And then the second piece is how do you rapidly test those, and how do you test them across different solutions so that you make better decisions?
I love that. I love the Yes, we do tend to fall into that trap. I think that even helped me even for today's work, like prototyping the entire idea versus piece them, like break them apart and test the individual and across. Teresa, we're coming up on time. I think we have a lot of love from the community. Israel loves a lot of your amazing explanation. Uh, Kyle mentioned that you're so surgical in your speech, going straight to the point, bring insight. Love this conversation. There's never a best solution. You're always learning. Everything is a bet. All right, Teresa, we have our final lightning round of question. If you can answer them in less than 60 seconds, that would be awesome. Are you up for the challenge?
Let's
Drum
do it.
roll. Awesome. So our first question is, what's your current favorite product and why?
My mountain bike, because it gets me outside.
That's a good one. Who would you consider as your product role model who has been very influential to your product career?
I can't pick just one. There's so many people. Early in my design career, Christina Watke, like back in the boxes and arrows days, did amazing work, still does amazing work. I think she's written a number of phenomenal books. I know Radical Focus is super popular, but I think every single one of her books is amazing. Marty Kagan obviously has been a huge inspiration and does phenomenal work and is probably the best missionary our industry has. I love Melissa Perry's work. I know I'm not doing a good job on the lightning round. There's just too many people.
I think you finished within a minute though, so that's awesome. Okay, final question. What is your final piece of advice or some resource that you like to share with this group of audience of product builders?
You know what? I think it's so easy to feel like you've got a handle on product or design or engineering or whatever your role is. And I think my advice is to just always keep learning. There's just especially right now, our field is evolving so much. And I feel like there's so many great ideas out there and new frameworks. John Cutler is someone else's name I'm going to throw out. He just, every day on Twitter, he's got a new visual and idea that's just amazing. So if you're not engaging with this community, I would start there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And again, lots of love all around. Teresa is just a brilliant and then never a best solution. But this is one of the best, learning sessions to teach about product sense. So thank you so much, Teresa, for joining us today. Thank you for your wisdom. And folks, please subscribe to our newsletter. So next Wednesday, we'll recap what we learned from today's session. And thank you so much again, Teresa, for your time and participation.
Thank you, everybody, for the great questions.
All right. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye.